Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
On. Good morning and welcome to the community hall meeting in town of Qualicum Beach. I want to start by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, in particular Qualicum First Nation. And before you we have the agenda, and we need to amend the agenda by adding a fourth item, so to speak, of the parking lot issues, and that is the wayfinding PowerPoint or wayfinding issue. So there'll be 4 parking lots, and I've been asked to chair that part of the meeting. From the October 16 and 21 meetings, any other things that you've added to the agenda? Then the agenda is adopted by consent. The minutes. Are there any errors or omissions in the minutes from October 16 and 21? Hearing none, then those minutes are approved by consent as well. And then the first welcome and introductions. I think we all know each other, so again, welcome. And we'll start with the parking lot issue, so to speak. And the first one is about the issue regarding the tree protection bylaw. So who would like to start off with that? Yep.
With your permission, I could walk through the first few slides to help you manage that decision making, just for council's ease, if you like.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Your Worship. So today we'll be looking at 4 with the addition of the item to the agenda. We'll go over the capital program for Q3 and preliminary high-level budget. We're going to be digging more into budget on November 6th. We do want to remind Council about your pending request for the direction on approach for asset replacement. We'll be touching on that today and reminding you we'll be seeking direction on November 20th. We will be looking at proposed blue sky capital projects and asking for Committee of the Whole's recommendation to Council on those. We'll provide opportunity for public input on those, and then we'll be coming back to the recommendations again. So as you mentioned, Your Worship, we have 4 parking lot items from today. The tree protection bylaw, these are carried forward from October 21st. Healthcare worker recruitment, the Arts and Culture Committee, and the late addition of wayfinding signage phase 2. So Your Worship, there is a staff recommendation that the budget provision for the initiative titled Tree Protection Bylaw Update be increased by $10,000 to $20,000 and commenced in fiscal 2028 in the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. This is a recommendation that the public and council saw October 21st. Alternatively, the committee may consider recommending to council that a third-party consultant be retained to undertake public engagement, research, and update of the Town of Qualicum Beach Tree Protection Bylaw with the budget allocation of $40,000 in fiscal 2025 of the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. Over to you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Varela. What is Council's wish? Councillor Young.
I'd like to make a notice of motion for this to go to a council meeting in the near future. I'd also,
Can I ask you to submit the notice of motion to staff, and then they'll put it on the next agenda for the regular council meeting? I assume it's for the regular council meeting? Yeah, you have to give notice of motions in advance of the meeting, in writing.
well then, I would like to say that we don't need a budget, that we'd like to go over the recommendations of Kevin Monahan and the Friends of the Forest and also of the Qualicum Beach Resident Association, that we make some small amendments in the next council meeting, and that presently, we'd like to abide by the Fire Smart regulations, where a resident, if they'd like to fire smart their home, they can do so without having to follow through with the tree bylaw.
Thank you. So through staff, the recommendations that were presented to us, and they were in yellow underlined at the last previous meeting, could they be a housekeeping measure so we can control how much we change? But they seem like, to me, reasonable suggestions, and I wonder how complicated it is to insert them in the current bylaw. Ms. Rilla.
Thank you, Worships. Some of them would be achieved relatively easy. Others have further reaching implications, both for staff and research. Again, if you go to that scoping sheet, it's not an insignificant amount of time that's anticipated. Staff are getting the feeling that council is looking for quite a robust review, and some of that yellow highlighted would require that, which is why the suggestion for the consultant was put forward. Again, these recommendations are made in consideration of existing staff capacity. So you saw, as the timelines were proposed at October 21st, we had enough staff time to achieve what council was wishing. Something like this, if advanced, would require further review of that staff time, which is why with the OCP review in 2025, we've just said it's beyond staff capacity. If council wants something done quickly, we'd like to rely on a consultant. It will still take staff time even with a consultant, as we know, but we would feel this approach would make the revisions achievable in 2025.
Thank you. Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. Well, I'm leaning towards the alternative at this point. I think that we had said we would put the tree bylaw in and then we would revisit it and see if it's working the way that we had hoped or anticipated. And yeah, I just think we want to make sure that the tree bylaw is having the desired outcomes and isn't causing issues for some people. I think, you know, I look at 40,000, well, it seems like a lot, but if somebody were to want to cut down quite a few trees on their property, they could incur costs of half that amount, right? So if you, it only takes a couple of people, and then this amount would be equivalent. Anyways, I just think that we want to make sure that we're leading by example, including all of the public lands and whatnot. And people say, well, this bylaw happened really quickly. Well, it did, but it was almost before, well, it was before council back in 2016, a very similar bylaw, if not the same. And then it was decided that we needed a plan before we implemented a bylaw. So then it sat on the shelf, basically waiting for the plan to happen, which did happen. And so now I think the bylaw is part of our urban forest master plan, and I think we need to do it justice. So I would be interested in moving the alternative motion.
Yes, and we can second that if we still have your discussion. So if you second that, thank you, and you can speak to it. Okay.
Thank you. I also am in favor of the alternative. I think when we did pass the tree protection bylaw, there was a lot of public concern that there hadn't been consultation, and with this alternative recommending third-party consultant, to undertake public engagement, I think that that's of definite benefit to the town and to the process. So I would be in agreement with this alternative.
Thank you. And that would include the comments you made about including other issues like fire protection and so on. So through the consultation process with the consultant, we could include all the comments, both from Mr. Monahan and others that have issues, into that process. So any further discussion? Councillor Young.
I just feel that I'm always conscious of the money that we spend, and 40,000 is an amount of money, and I feel that we have a sufficient tree canopy in our town, and most of the trees are owned by town, so if we are more mindful of what we cut down, I think it's not something that we need to spend money and worry about, and also be taxing our citizens a fine or a fee.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Young is opposed. Carries. The next one. Perhaps you could introduce that as well, Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the second parking lot item Committee of the Whole is being asked to make a recommendation to Council on is the healthcare worker recruitment. So the standing recommendations from the scoping sheets have not changed between last week and this week. So the recommendations before Council are that the initiative not be advanced to the 2025 to 2029 financial plan, and further that an initial meeting with Island Health and representatives from the Flowerstone Society and Division of Family Practice be held to better understand recruitment needs prior to selecting a service provider. The scoping sheet also provided Council with an alternative that you could proceed with a budget provision of $18,900 as proposed by the Chamber of Commerce to fund a fee-for-service agreement with the Chamber to provide healthcare practitioner recruitment services. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And just for everybody's information, when we went to the UBCM, we met with Island Health, and all of Council did, to explain what our concerns were. And we were talking about having a meeting with people from the community that are involved in attracting and retaining doctors. And then the chair said, I would like to be part of that discussion. So I think we need to take them up on it, and that's exactly what the motion is. So I support the recommendation, not the alternative, and I'll move such. Councillor Skipsey seconding. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carries. Thank you. The next one.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the third parking lot item this morning is the establishment of an Arts and Culture Committee. The same state of this recommendation is that we've had no changes. So as per the scoping sheet that was provided on October 21st, the recommendation is that Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that the request for establishment of an Arts and Culture Committee not be advanced to the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. And alternatively, that the Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that the request for financial and in-kind staff support for the establishment of an Arts Council Society, which is distinct from a committee, be advanced to a future year's strategic planning process for consideration in fiscal 2027 of this upcoming financial plan, and that a placeholder budget of $50,000 be allocated from the Strategic Initiatives Reserve. We also provided another alternative, the second alternative, that Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that $85,000 be allocated in each fiscal year of the 2025 to 2029 financial plan, beginning in fiscal 2026, for the position of a permanent committee clerk with funding from property taxation. And so, as I advised last time on October 21st, staff capacity for supporting committees is is already over capacity. Council has us looking to review the terms and mandates of the existing committees in 2025. Staff's recommendation was based on the fact you may want to undertake that review first, provide staff direction, see what council's needs are with regards to advisory bodies, and make any recommendations on new bodies or expanded portfolios in that process. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. I'll let Councillor Young speak first. It was your idea. Go ahead.
Is to form a Arts and Culture Society, a group, just merely volunteer people to be at a table on a monthly basis to discuss what we can have new or support in the way of an arts and culture event. It is not to ask for staff money or time, or I'm sorry, town money or staff time, merely that we would like that the town advertise it in their newsletter and on their Facebook that this group would like volunteers, and the contact person will be me. Any writing that's required, it will come through me. We're not asking for times from staff or money from town, but we're merely trying to improve and have more arts and culture events in our community.
Thank you, and I look for staff to make this efficient. Could we ask Councillor Young for you to present what you just said in writing for the council meeting when this is up for discussion? Would that be the appropriate way to go? Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. Direction today is preferred because, again, we're developing that budget on an ongoing process, and we're also allocating staff time. So to help us, sorry, I think we've jumped to the next item. To help us with that work planning and budget, it would be helpful today. Of course, the decision is always council's, so we could take alternative direction. I think it's important for both council and the public to understand that if this is a committee that is formed, it has to be formed in compliance with legislation. There has to be staff support. There has to be budget. So just a note, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think we talked about this before, but we're looking more at a society like the St. Andrews Lodge Historic and Cultural Society. They're not an advisory body to council. They have their own meetings. They raise money. They have their own bylaws. They run their own organization. So I don't think it has to necessarily be an advisory committee to council. It can be something like that. As a society, they could run that. Is that not possible? So then the first recommendation, if you can bring that up. The council request, no, there's an before the alternative. There, that one. So they could establish an Arts and Culture Committee without town support.
Thank you, Your Worship. It couldn't be a committee. The second alternative does speak to supporting the establishment of an Arts Council Society, which wouldn't have those obligations of staff time and budget. Council may wish to consider dropping off the second part of this alternative recommendation about the placeholder budget of $50,000. So that would read that Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that the request for financial and in-kind support for the establishment of an Arts Council Society, we could say if there's no staff time, we would probably close off the scoping sheet, Your Worship, and remove the budget. So perhaps there's a different recommendation, if that's the direction Committee of the Whole is seeking, that we could revise and bring back.
Yes, I think rather than wordsmithing it on the fly,
Yes.
I think the intent is clear. And so the initiative by Councillor Young is not to look for staff time or money, but have a committee that could function on its own without town tax dollars or staff time. Councillor Van de Vogt.
So just so I'm clear, it's not, excuse me, it's not the forming of a committee, but a forming of a society. So they are independent from the town. So there's
correct.
no town involvement whatsoever.
Yeah, but
Okay.
we don't have the wording handy, but that's the intent.
Okay,
Councillor
and
Stevenson.
how would that essentially differ from the first alternative, that the establishment of an Arts and Culture Committee not be advanced?
Because a committee, as was explained, has certain rules that we have to abide by. a society can be different. And rather than getting into the wording of it right now, I think the intent is for staff to work with Councillor Young to come up with a wording that would strike a society to advance arts and culture without being called a committee or an advisory committee, and without funding and support from town. Councillor Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think for council and the public's benefit, what we would do is we would bring back a recommendation as the one before you, but we'd put a couple whereases that refer to the establishment of a society, and then we'd ask you to close off this scoping sheet accordingly, and we'll do that at November 6th.
Does that make sense?
I just have a question in terms of how this group would relate to Tosh.
We will determine that when we see the wording.
Okay?
Thank you. Councillor Skipsey?
Thank you. We did have an email that we received that pointed out to us that there is already a Oceanside Arts Society, so I'm not sure how that relates, like if we're recreating the wheel here. The other thing is that when this came up, I went back and visited the town's Make Culture Count plan that had been prepared and adopted. I don't think it was actually adopted in 2012, but none of that has been advanced, I don't believe, but there was some really good information in that plan, and one of the strategies of Goal 4 to improve promotion and coordination of arts and culture scene was to form a cultural roundtable or a partners in art group to facilitate coordinating information sharing and advocacy role for arts and culture in the area. And that was to be totally separate from the town. And just to follow up on that, there's also like strategies for encouraging cooperative cross-promotional marketing efforts amongst arts organizations. And I know that Tosh has been trying to help artists to promote themselves, so maybe they would have a role in that. And also, it said review signage bylaws to identify means to better promoting arts and culture businesses, organizations, and events. So perhaps that could have something intertwined with the wayfinding. And I just wondered if maybe the chamber, instead of helping us with our doctor recruitment, might have a role in communicating and promoting and whatnot. So I think, you know, there could be a couple opportunities in our fee-for-service agreements, perhaps, to have some of this work undertaken by the organizations that are already existing.
Thank you. Those are all very good thoughts. And I read the arts and culture program from back, I guess, 12 years ago, and almost all the recommendations said responsibility, town staff. And so that's the one area where we may have to take some different wording. But I think the intent is clear. I think the thoughts of working with the chamber, working with the old schoolhouse, that will all be part of the discussion. We just need to make sure that the society can operate legally without having to depend on town staff and tax dollars, but operate within the context of what we're trying to achieve. So with that, I don't know if I want to make a motion that kind of looks like that, but I think this is referred back to staff. I think that's probably the best thing to do, is to refer this item back to staff. Can I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Young, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And the fourth one.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is the late adder to today's. So wayfinding signage phase 2. The recommendation is an alternative to what was seen on October 1st, which had a timeline of 2028. We have received correspondence requesting this timeline be advanced, and Councillor Vander Valk will likely want to speak to that. But the recommendation before Council today is, whereas Phase 2 of the Wayfinding Signage Initiative has significant budget and staff time anticipated, be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that Phase 2 of the Wayfinding Signage Initiative be referred to the Fall 2025 Strategic Planning process for consideration of advancement from 2028 to 2026. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Vander Valk.
Thank you. Well, I think Ms. Varela pointed out the pertinent pertinent considerations, but essentially the chamber is concerned about leaving wayfinding until 2028, but the town does need to do its due diligence in terms of what would be involved in a larger project. So this is a way for everyone to do what they think they need to do to accomplish clear wayfinding in the town. So I would like to make the motion that we go ahead with this.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Van der Valk, seconded by Councillor Young. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you, Ms. Varela. And I guess this was the last of the parking lots?
It was, Your Worship, and now with your permission, I'll hand the clicker over to the Director of Finance.
You have my permission.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'd like to just start by, for the public's benefit, start by clarifying the difference between the October 21st strategic planning session and today's strategic planning session. So the focus of the October 21st strategic planning session was on strategic initiatives that will be part of our operating budget. The focus was on reviewing requests that represent one-time strategic project expenditures that will be included in the operating budget. And the focus of today's strategic planning session is to advance requests and enhancements to existing assets or investments in new assets to the capital plan. And so consideration of these requests will result in an increased level of service to the community, and these expenditures will have life cost implications. Excuse me. So in the next few slides, I'm going to just provide information to provide context to today's session. And I'll basically talk about a high-level introduction to capital infrastructure, funding sources for that infrastructure, and capital assets that are owned by the town. And then Oliver Watson, our manager of capital projects, and I will tag team to provide a very high-level year-to-date progress on 2024 capital projects, and more detailed presentation on the status of those projects will be provided on November 6th when we go through the third quarter review. And subsequent to that, I'll revert back to providing some additional contextual information with respect to asset management, which will be intended to support council in their decision-making in reviewing today's Blue Sky Capital initiatives. So council allocates resources for capital infrastructure and asset management priorities through the annual budget process. And capital expenditures are either made for the replacement or renewal of existing assets or for enhancements to existing assets or investment in brand new assets. When making these types of investments, life cycle costs need to be considered, and these assets have a limited life, and they'll eventually need to be replaced. So we need to ensure that contributions to asset replacement reserves are sufficient to replace these assets at the end of their useful life. And we'll be talking more about this later in the presentation. In terms of our investment in assets, possible funding sources for capital expenditures are grant contributions such as the Community Growth Fund, the Community Works Fund, which was formerly known as a gas tax fund. There's CACs. We can look at available reserves, development cost charges, and long-term borrowing. And again, to provide some context, as of December 31st, the town owns about $220 million in assets, and that's based on the original cost of having acquired those assets. And we own buildings with a life cycle cost implication in excess of $38 million, transportation assets with life cycle cost implications in excess of $73 million, land improvements valued at, with life cycle cost implications in excess of $31 million. And land improvements would be things like trails, park structures, street lights, signs, catch basins, etc. And we also own land with a market value far in excess of the $39 million. So that $39 million represents the cost at which we've acquired our land holdings. So all of the assets that we own are used to excuse me, provide services to the community, and these assets have life cycle costs associated with them. And these life cycle costs are typically funded through the Asset Replacement Reserve. It's worth noting that the annual contribution to the Asset Replacement Reserve are not sufficient to address the life cycle costs of these assets into the sustainable future. And this gap between what we're contributing to the Asset Reserve and what's required from the Asset Reserve to take care of our assets is referred to as the Asset Replacement Infrastructure Funding Gap. So on that note, we're actually going to pause on asset management, which we'll come back to later, and Oliver and I are going to provide you high-level update on the 2024 Q3 capital plan. As mentioned earlier, today's update is very, very high level, and a more detailed presentation will be provided on November the 6th. So in terms of our 2024 capital program, we have a budget of $13.8 million, and to date, we've spent, to September 30th, we've spent $5.8 million. The projects within the program roll up to 8 categories, with those categories being transportation, buildings, airport infrastructure, equipment and vehicles, drainage infrastructure, parks and trails, water, and sewer. Of the $13.8 million, $8.2 million is for the replacement of existing assets, and $5.6 million is for investment in new assets. So this slide, sorry, which slide am I on? Oh, so we're going to basically get into our transportation infrastructure program. So we have 7 projects in the transportation area. 2 are complete, 5 are in progress, and this area has a $3.4 million budget associated with it. And I won't go through the progress on the individual assets. Information will be available online as the public wants to look through progress on each individual asset. And over to you, Oliver.
Thank you. So the first project is the Bay Street Slope Stabilization Project. We just completed installing the storm system down that road, and the crew have now started on the road base excavation. So that project is being completed because as those people who have used Bay Street will have recognized that the roadside barriers are tipping over on about a 45-degree, ready to roll down into the cabins below, and the road is quite distorted. It's on, it was obviously constructed on some poor material, so we are going to install quite a bit of geogrid to hold that road into place. When I was on site yesterday, I discovered that they had just peeled through 6 layers of asphalt before they got down to some dirt. So this has been an ongoing problem. So hopefully we fix this. As far as the schedule goes on that one, the weather has been a bit of a problem. The rain has been a bit of a problem specifically. Every time they get heavy rain, they need to tarp the site to make sure that no silt runs off down into the ocean. So it is delaying them, and we are still have our fingers crossed to complete this year. The next project is the roundabout art piece. That's been a project that I'm really pleased with. I worked with Jesse Rocalma to have that design created, and it turned out fantastic. So as a cherry on top, we had some savings in our estuary the estuary improvements that had to be completed outside the roundabout there. And we had some savings in the rockwork specifically. And with that, I reached out to Destination Development and asked if they would allow us to put the cost of the art piece towards that grant to make up for the savings in the rock, and they did. They approved that, so happy to say that all of that cost of the art piece was also grant funded. The next one is our community transportation plan improvements. So we installed a new crosswalk on Bennett Road at Sunrise Drive. along with new RFB crosswalk lights. So that included a new crosswalk as well, because there wasn't one there before. That's where the Dolly Mount Trail crosses. And over on Jones at Fern, we had installed new RFB crosswalk lights there going across Jones Road into the Civic Center. And since then, we have also wrapped up the speed hump on First at Rye. The lights for that were installed yesterday, but there's a problem with one of the light fixtures, and we're waiting for a replacement part to show up. So once that arrives, it'll be fully functional. Solar lights, solar street lights were also ordered for a couple of the crosswalks. They're in really poorly lit areas. And instead of trenching a bunch of electrical wires, we have elected to try some solar-powered street lights. So some got installed last night on Bennett Road at Sunrise, and we'll see how those work out. The next one is a couple more projects that were on the community transportation plan list there. The one on the left is Harlech Road, so that's across from Naked Naturals there, between the end of the new path and Memorial specifically. There was always parking up against that curb, which made it very difficult to get from the end of the new pathway up to Memorial Road, Memorial Ave. So we delineated that with some of those rubber delineators to make a separated pathway and make it much more safer for pedestrians to get between those 2 points. And on the right, we installed a new crosswalk at that roundabout button on 2nd Avenue East at First Street. That does not have RFBs, but it does have ramps and crosswalk lines now. The next page is the paving program. So in Q2, we replaced the asphalt on Beach Road between First Ave and 2nd Ave. We also did some patching on Harlech Road between Memorial and First Street, where those delineators were we saw in the previous slide. And we also replaced the crosswalk at the intersection there from zebra stripes to parallel bars, which is what's supposed to be there to begin with. At the time of the creation of this slide, the plan was to spend the remaining funding for that paving on the laneway and behind the East Village project where that crane is positioned. However, that crane is now going to be staying there until February, so we're unable to complete that portion of the project. So we have had to shift some gears, and we have since put some new pavement down where the potholes were developing in front of the museum on Beach, between Sunningdale and the railway tracks. And I do believe Rob has another site in mind for the rest of the bit of funding. Furthermore, we used some of that funding to put the speed hump together over on First Rye. The next project is the 19A ditch infill project. So that project will create about 29 parking spaces and about 230 meters of shared path. We received a $500,000 grant from the BC Active Transportation Fund for this project. It's essentially phase 2, an extension of the phase 1 ditching infill on the south side of 19A. And we have been, that one just went out to tender at the end of September. It took that long because we had to wait for an archaeological site alteration permit. Unfortunately, we had to wait 10 months for that permit, and that's why this project is going out very late in the season. So on November 20th, we'll be talking about issuing that tender. It just closed about a week and a half ago. The next project is the Seacrest slope stabilization design. So for those that have driven down Seacrest Road, it looks similar to Bay Street, where the side of the road is slipping down the slope and down to the road below in this case. So we are working with Tetra Tech and other engineering firms to create a design that will help stabilize that slope. At this point, it's going to be a mechanically stabilized earth retaining wall on the lower side of that road. So we're hoping to have that prepared for early 2025 for both budget approval and putting out for tender.
Thank you. So in the buildings area, we have 5 projects there, 4 are in progress, and 1 is not started. The Public's Workyard fuel system will come back to council for reconsideration in the 2025 to 29 financial plan. Projects have a $1.7 million budget, and next few slides will be, I believe, some photos from Oliver in this category. Oops, I went backwards. Oh, we didn't have any slides in that category, my apologies. And airport, we're gonna jump to the airport infrastructure area. 4 projects at the airport, all are fully complete. The first project there was engineering, consulting and works that were required to submit a grant application for about $3.3 million in paving works on the airport runway. AV gas fuel replacement was completed. CCTV was installed for security at the airport. And the last project, again, was a grant application that was submitted for a 100% funded acquisition of a loader, which will be brought forward for council consideration in the 2025 to 29 financial plan. In our equipment area, we have 14 different projects. 8 are complete and 6 are in progress, and this area has a total budget of $1.4 million. And most of the in-progress items are anticipated to be complete by year end. Oops.
So one of the big purchases for this year was the HydroVac. That is a piece of equipment that took about almost 18 months to receive. The crew are really pleased with it. So that particular piece of equipment, for those that don't know, we use that for flushing out our storm and sewer mains. And if we ever have a water main break, this allows us to do some safe excavation around other utilities like BC Hydro and TELUS, Rogers, etc., as well as our own. It's essentially a pressure washer with a giant vacuum that sucks all the material up as we're exposing the utilities. So we use this almost on a daily basis, and almost every single time we have a utility emergency. We had a unit that we traded in for this. This was about a $700,000 truck, and we ended up getting a pretty decent trade-in on our used truck that we returned.
So we have 2 projects in the drainage area with a budget of $1.9 million. It's the Beach Creek culvert replacement and the engineering works for the Grandin Creek confluence project. Any questions before I forward to Oliver to go through the projects?
Well, I'm just sitting here amazed how hard our tax dollars are at work. And all the issues that and things that we are working on, especially from Mr. Watson's perspective, working with our First Nations. I know you've been working regarding St. Andrews Lodge as well with Chief Rakama and others. So well done. And this is a long list of projects that we're working on, but I think it's good for everybody to see that some are to repair and some are proactive. So I really appreciate the thoughts that went into this presentation. Any questions from council?
Go ahead, Your Worship, sorry.
I don't think there's any questions, so proceed.
Okay.
Okay, next slide there. There we go. So this is the Beach Creek culvert replacement job. For those that don't know, this is underneath Crescent Road East at the outlet of Beach Creek, where it crosses by the Heritage Forest. The culvert was about 40 feet deep there. There were two culverts in the ground. One was just over a meter, if I do recall, and the other one was a 600 millimeter diameter pipe. And about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we experienced the outlet of those two pipes. They fell off. One had totally eroded and disappeared. The other had broken away, causing the embankment above them to slip away, leading to about a 10-foot tall vertical face, which was quite concerning. And we cambered it. There were some gaps in the joints and a high risk of water from the creek piping through those gaps and causing further erosion and collapse of that road. It would have been a disaster had that taken place. So I'm really glad that we actually got this through the process of being replaced. And we now have an improved fist passage underneath that road. You can see the rocks inside the pipe there in the center picture. And since these pictures were taken, the road has now been paved, and we're almost done. We're probably a week or two left before we're opening. So, next.
So in the Parks and Trails area, we have 8 projects. 2 are complete, 4 in progress, and 2 have not yet been started. Of the 2 that are not started, we're waiting for the, essentially the pickleball courts have a contribution that will be made by the Pickleball Court Association. So this project will come forward to council for reconsideration for the 2025 and 29 financial plan. And the street banner replacement project was deferred pending basically we have a council strategic initiative which has to do with rebranding of the town's assets, so consideration of that. So that can be taken into consideration before we advance street banner replacement. And this particular program of the budget, Parks and Trails, has a total budget of $1.8 million.
This next project is part of the accessibility improvements that were proposed. In this case, it's on the intersection of Fern Road and Primrose. And there is a, so to speak, a custom storm drain that goes underneath the, just outside that hydro pole there on the right-hand side, crossing underneath the ramp that goes down to that crosswalk. It's really something that needs to be improved, and our plan is to create a node similar to what we would see at an intersection along 2nd, a larger node with a proper wheelchair letdown, and improve the ramps on the north side of that intersection as well. So I was hoping to complete this fall. However, I think weather is going to be against us here, and I'm guessing it's now going to be a 2025 project. And the viewing platform. So that project is now open. Pleased with how that turned out. That opened on September 27th, and there was a ribbon cutting for that in early October. Yeah, it's complete. Yeah, it's complete. And the next one is the estuary. That one is also 99% complete there. All the plantings are done. That was a grant-funded project from Destination BC, I think it's called. And the only thing that is left to do there is create a pad for a bike repair stand that we're planning on installing on the outside of the Chamber of Commerce building there, as well as installation of a couple of interpretive signs on the outside of the railings here. So aside from that, that project is complete as well. So that grant included a bottle filling station, which we installed at the beach bathrooms, as well as some benches that are positioned on that deck as well.
And in the water infrastructure area, we have 10 projects in the 2024 budget, capital budget. 2 are complete, 6 are in progress, and the 2 that show is not started, the budget was repurposed for those through council resolutions during the year for other purposes. And we have a total budget of $2.1 million associated with projects listed on in the water area here. I'm going to just pause. Any questions on this slide here? Any questions on this slide here, Your Worship, before we proceed?
Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Van der Waal. Go ahead.
I actually had one on the previous one. When you talked about the interpretive signs, I just wondered what they were to cover. I know the ones down at the Seaside Nature Park are very good and outline all the what you're looking at and about ecology and the environment.
Yep.
That's correct, and they will be similar to that, and I'm happy to share what we've got with you after this meeting, for sure.
Well, I think we'd all like to see it. Well, Mr.
I don't have that with me, but
Okay.
I'm happy to share that.
Sure. Proceed.
I just like, from my experience, there's people that go down on the beach and take things that are like living creatures and think that they can take them home with them and whatnot, like the sand dollars or whatever. And I wonder if there's going to be any kind of educational component to that.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So I'd like to add that the firm that designed the signs at the Seaside Nature Park are also doing the design for this project. And it is a collaboration ongoing. You know, they have input from First Nations, stream keepers, the town. So the project needed to be completed, the construction, before we could take some finished photos and integrate them onto the sign. But I think, you know, we are looking for that type of input as to what the most important information is. So if any individual member of council would like to send some suggestions, we can look at ways to incorporate it. Thank you.
Councillor Van der Waal.
Thank you. I'm actually a couple of slides back. So you just mentioned, Mr. Hare, that regarding the pickleball courts, you said that the group was making a donation towards the courts. I'm assuming this is the courts that are in the community park?
So the project itself was included in the 2024-28 financial plan based on a council resolution, which required 50% of the funding for that project to come from the Pickleball Association or user group. So right now what we have included in the 2024 budget is, I believe, $170,000 budget provision with $85,000 funded, dependent on a contribution from that group.
Okay, thank you.
And I think it would help with their fundraising if we showed a picture of where exactly those pickleball courts would be. I mean, we know they're around the skateboard park area, and the parking lot at the Civic Center. But I think it would help them to say, this is the site the town is going to prepare for us, and also $85,000 towards this project, so they can go and show that picture to whoever they're asking for funds, so they have actually something concrete to look at. Thank you. Anything else, Council? Please proceed.
So we were on the water slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Watson to, he's going to go over a few of the water projects.
Okay, the first one on the top left there is the Rupert Road Water Looping Project. That one was a project that we worked together with the RDN to fund. They funded about $720,000, if I do recall, of this $1.5 million project. It included about 1.4 kilometers of 250 millimeter PVC water main that connected the end of the line along Rupert near Qualicum Road to the other line on at the airport entrance. That project is coming to a completion here as well. They've installed all the water main. The PRV station at Sparrow has been installed except for the kiosk that goes over top of that to protect it. So we're waiting on that kiosk. It should be showing up here in about a week. And then we will plug the BC Hydro into it, and we'll probably be done that project as well. The one below that is the Quatno water main replacement. So that one was a 60-meter section of 150 millimeter AC water main that went through the trees between Hemsworth and Hull Road. And that one needed to be fixed because a few years ago we had a failure in that pipe, and a temporary repair clamp was placed on that water main until we had the funds to go ahead and fix that water main. So we've done that now, and that project is complete. The next one is the abandoned asbestos cement water main on Highway 19A east of Crescent Road West. So that on that section of highway, there are two water mains. There's an old AC water main and a new PVC water main on the other side of the highway. And all this project is extending the water services from the south side to the north side, connecting them all to the newer water main, and abandoning the AC water main. So that project was issued to Luco Construction, and they are planning to start that in about 2 weeks. And they should be done before Christmas. So the next project in our capital plan was the Berwick 5 well connection. So what that means is there's a new well that we wanted to add to our inventory up and behind the fire hall, but we still haven't received the island health permit for that. So instead, we elected to reallocate the funds from that project to replace the two 45-year-old pumps that we have in Berwick 2 and 3. So we have since, now that that well field has been shut down for the winter and is resting there and recharging, we have since pulled those two wells, and we are working with a well drilling company to come in and flush those out, do an assessment and a cleaning on them, and then we'll reassess the size of the pumps that we actually need for that, because I think they were oversized before, and we can do with some smaller pumps in this case. And we will be hoping, we're expecting to have those back in action before the springtime when we need to turn that well field back on. The next project is the SCADA hardware project. So SCADA, for those that don't know, is our computer system that operates our water system. So, for instance, there's sensors in all of our reservoirs that say, I'm running low, I need to be recharged. It cues the pumps to turn on in varying order. And it also keeps track of how much water we consume, etc. So it's important to have that hardware totally reliable. And there was quite a few older obsolete components, and we have almost completed that project. That's expected to be completed certainly in Q4 here. The next one is the Higson lift station. Go ahead.
Oh,
And
thank you.
Councillor,
So the
anytime you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll stop the proceeding. Thank you.
Well, I'm just curious if that new water system is going more electronic than what it looks like now.
I'm sorry, can you clarify that?
Just if the technology has changed much, or will it look the same? Like, is it the same kind of, are we replacing it with something different or just upgrading?
They look very similar. They're just modern components that you can replace now if necessary. Yeah, it's not going to look a lot different. It'll still be a reliable system. Sorry, not to say that the new components aren't reliable, but we're happy with what we've got, and yeah, it's not going to look a lot different.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the last of the capital program categories is sewer, and we had one project budgeted, which is complete, had a budget of $40,000 associated with it. And over to you, Oliver. I believe we've got a picture of that.
Yep. So this is the Higson lift station. It's our only force main component that we have in our sewer system in the town. So this is located down on Higson Road near our municipal boundary. And so this is essentially a big tank at the end of a sewer main, and the effluent pours into that and is pumped through a force main up to the end of the water, or the beach access road over the crest of the hill and down into the interceptor. So what we were experiencing was inside that tank with the pumps are check valves. And when the effluent was getting pumped up, and once that emptied the tank, the pumps would shut off, but the check valves weren't working, so all the effluent that was in the pipe would come back into the tank and fill the tank prematurely. And after replacing these check valves, instead of cycling that pump about 57 times a day, we reduced it to about 9 times a day. So that'll extend the life of the pump. And if we ever have any emergencies for like a power outage, we'll be better prepared instead of having that tank prematurely fill. That project is complete.
So, Your Worship, that concludes the Q3 update. And as I had mentioned earlier, we will be providing the agenda for the November 6th meeting will include a more detailed information on the Q3 update for capital, strategic initiatives, and the operating budget, which we'll review with Council on November the 6th. Any questions on the Q3 update?
No, I think that was really well done. I've been around here a while, but that's the most detailed presentation on even a sewer tank of how it works and what didn't work to make sure that all our facilities are working. So thank you very much for providing this detailed information and the costs associated with that. I think the public should be pleased that your tax dollars are well spent and needed in areas where we are having problems to prevent further problems. Thank you very much. So back to, I think, to turning it over to our facilitator, Alison Hepker. Ready?
Oh.
Your Worship, the Director of Finance will shift gears slightly. That was the Q3 presentation that's ended, and now we're going to go into talking about infrastructure in a more general way about sustainability.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So again, the information I'm going to provide in the next few slides is to provide Council with, and the public, with additional information to provide context for the the blue sky list items that we will be reviewing later on in today's presentation. So in terms of sustainable infrastructure, the organization or the municipality has been transitioning to a life cycle term approach in reviewing and addressing its capital assets. As I'd mentioned earlier, we do have an infrastructure funding gap that we need to address, and we worked with a consultant on an asset replacement plan in 2023, and in developing an asset replacement strategy in which which was presented to Council, I believe, on October the 2nd,
yep. And
it provided several scenarios in how we can address that infrastructure funding gap. Oh, just a sec. So this is a slide that Council has seen many times before, and this slide actually, the statement in it forms the foundation of our asset management work to date. So work and advancement of asset management initiatives is based on Council's commitment to taking a systematic approach towards service asset and asset financial sustainability that can be incremental, measured, and tailored to needs and the capacity of the town. So much work has been done in the last 2 years to advance strong asset management practice and stewardship of the town's assets. And that work includes Council having established a number of statutory reserves in 2023. And on the right hand of this slide is a list of the asset reserves that were established to take care of our infrastructure in 2023. And this work was reflective of best practices in asset management practices, and it laid the foundation for the asset management work, which has helped us identify the infrastructure funding gap. which can be addressed based on risk and service level scenarios. We need to keep in mind that the asset replacement strategy deals with the replacement of existing assets only. It does not address investment in new assets. And on that note, just again to provide some context, the 2025 capital plan, which will be brought forward for council in the 2025 budget meetings, will include $12 million, which is proposed expenditure of $12 million for the replacement of existing assets. And funding sources for that, $7 million will be grant dependent, $2 million will be proposed to be funded through the Community Works Fund, which is known as the Gas Tax Fund, through the Community Growth Fund, and $3 million will be proposed to be funded from the Asset Replacement Reserve. Now, just again, to provide more context, our Asset Replacement Reserve will have an estimated opening balance of about $3.5 million. We contribute annually about $1.5 million, and the annual draw from that reserve that's required is 2.5. So doing the math and looking at these numbers, you can see that a $1.5 million contribution is not adequate for sustainable, basically for sustaining our life cycle costs of our assets. Any questions on this slide before I proceed to the next?
Thank you. Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. I just have a question about if there's any opportunity to check in with residents about their preferences on the infrastructure funding gap. Like when Paul Murray presented to us, there was the number of different options, right? We can go big or we can skimp. And then there was different risks and outcomes that were associated with each of those choices. And I just wondered if there's any opportunity for us to ask the public or consult with the public about which of those choices would be their preference.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we have daylighted, as you will, that discussion numerous times. So council has seen the robust presentation. The Director of Finance is about to walk us through those options again. We will likely touch on it again on the 6th, which is a committee of the whole, which allows for public input, and then we're seeking council direction on November 20th. If council wants over and above that kind of engagement, perhaps we can look at that for next year's planning. Again, our approach to addressing that funding gap requires us to put a lens on that each year, and if council wishes a more robust engagement program than that, we could anticipate that for 2026.
Is this a question that could be included in the quality of life survey?
Potentially it could be. I think that the timing will be a question. So right now, and the Director of Finance is currently developing the budget based on a very low risk tolerance, and he's going to speak to that shortly. But we could, as staff, take that aside to say, is there a way we could preface this for more input for next year as well? Because I don't think the timing will work for this year, but it's a really great thought for going forward.
I think the difficulty I would have is, okay, we talk about grant dependent, all kinds of projects. Which projects? It's one thing to say we need another $1 million, but for what? Like we heard earlier from Mr. Watson, all the things that we were doing. That makes sense. I don't think anybody would say, no, we don't need to fix these things. They all would say, yes, we need to upgrade those facilities or those infrastructure needs. So rather than talking about dollars, I think with the dollars, you should put what project we're talking about. Otherwise, nobody will say, yeah, increase my taxes. I don't know what you're going to spend it on, but go ahead.
So, Your Worship, when we come forward in the budget process, all of our projects that are grant dependent will be identified. And it is important to keep in mind that most grant funding is available for investment in new infrastructure. So if we receive grant funding for the replacement of existing infrastructure, we're very, very fortunate. And it's usually for very, very high risk type replacement, so either through disaster mitigation grants or grants that address very, very high risk to the organization.
Thank you, Your Worship. So based on Council's feedback at the last meeting, I did discuss that with the consultant, and we do anticipate a more detailed level of information on November 6th. Again, this is just to sort of provide Council with some context today, and we'll pause for questions after we move through those bucket scenarios over the next few slides.
Thank you. So in the presentation that was made to Council on November the 2nd, the consultant talked about an asset health score. So that's the health of the town's assets. And so really it's a different approach to asset management, essentially. And the state of our assets is generally we're in a good state of health. We basically, the asset health score is a function of percentage of assets that are past their useful life and percentage of assets consumed. So currently 6% of our assets are beyond their useful life and 52% have been consumed. And that translates into an asset health score of 88%. If we were not to increase our contribution to our asset reserves for the replacement of assets, and we were to operate with the existing contribution to our asset reserve, in 30 years, 32% of our assets would be past their useful life, and 90% of our assets would be totally consumed, and our health score would drop to about 30%. What that means is we would end up being reactive to breakdowns. It would likely result in interruption to services and basically a higher risk to the community in not receiving the services that it receives today, receiving the level of services that it receives today. Sorry, this clicker is not wanting to cooperate. So Council was provided with 3 different scenarios at the presentation on November the 2nd. So as I mentioned earlier, our current health score is at 88% and represents the level of services that are currently provided to the community. And so the first scenario was maintaining a level of service that is comparable and risk that is similar to where we're at today. And second scenario was accepting a little bit more risk and letting our asset score drop. And that would result in, so basically that would result in past life assets increasing to 14%, consumed assets at 73%, and it would result in a slight drop to the annual contribution required to reserves. And then there was a third scenario that was presented that had a higher level of, even a higher level of risk associated with it, and it would see our asset, we would accept a higher level of risk, but it would see our contribution being a little bit lower to asset reserves. And I'll go through each of those contributions in a subsequent slide. So scenario number 1 actually would see our contribution to reserve going up by about $66 a year if we were to take a look at all of our funds combined. So what this is saying is that we would have an increase of $66 a year in 2025, $66 increase in 2026, and onwards for 15 years to get to a sustainable level. The contributions to the Water and Capital Fund would come through user rates, whereas the contribution to the Capital Fund would come through an increase in tax rates. Scenario 2 would see us taking a little bit more risk, and our contribution would drop to about $46 a year for all 3 of our funds. So that would see our increase in annual taxes going up by $31 a year for the general fund, and it would see our increase in water rates going up by $6 a year, and our increase to our sewer fund going up by $9. And again, we would basically be accepting a little bit more risk to disruption in services. And scenario 3 would see even a higher level of risk being accepted, and that would drop our annual contribution or the annual increase required for the contribution to reserves to $32 a year for the average household. And again, that would translate to $29 annual increase in property taxes and $3 increase in sewer rates, and it would require a nominal increase to no increase for the Water Capital Fund. And it would, again, it would be associated with a higher level of risk to disruption in services. So we will be coming back to Council on November the 20th for direction on which scenario we should use. However, we are building the current draft budget based on scenario 1, which would essentially see our level of services being maintained at where it is today. Do you have any questions on these slides from Council?
Yes, I do. All these buckets and all that sounds great conceptually, but we need to know, what are we talking about? Are we going to let a roof leak longer or something else? These buckets and numbers mean nothing to me. I need to know what asset are we talking about and what needs to be done and how we can make it less costly and take more risk. To see these numbers is nice, but it's all conceptual. I need personally to see, what asset are you talking about? Do we let a road lay and not pave it every so often, or do we pave it more often? It's got to be specific. These numbers to me mean nothing. I'm sitting here and I go, I'm supposed to know all this, and I have no idea what these buckets reflect in the real life, outside on our assets. So I need to see that. And I've seen this before, and I've asked before, be specific about what projects, what assets we're actually talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So staff will be looking to provide that with the benefit of the consultant in attendance by Zoom on November 6th. So we're working on that right now, and the expectation is clear. So thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So turning our attention to investment in new assets, which will be the focus of today's strategic planning session. Investments in new assets are advanced through the budget process based on master plans, operational needs, and through the Blue Sky capital requests. And again, potential funding sources for these assets are grants, long-term borrowing, the sale of existing assets, proceeds from the sale of existing assets, DCCs, community amenity contributions, and the asset investment reserve. And again, to provide further context, the asset investment reserve itself, if you take a look at the box down at the bottom, has an anticipated opening balance of about $40,000, and there's an annual contribution made to that reserve through property taxes of about $300,000. So the 2025 capital program, which will come forward to Council this month, will include $1.7 million of investments in new assets. And just again, to provide context, $1 million will come from the proceeds of sale of the bus garage site. And again, 1.1 million of the 1.7 million is for development at the bus garage site. And $250,000 will come from the Community Growth Fund and from the Community Works Fund, which was previously known as a gas tax fund. And $270,000 will be funded through the Asset Investment Reserve, and $160,000 through DCCs. And so, again, discretionary projects are Blue Sky Capital project. Blue Sky Capital projects are discretionary projects, and they're not part of the core capital program, and Council will be making decisions on which Blue Sky projects to advance to the capital program today. And the capital program will be reviewed in its entirety in the upcoming 2025 budget process. And I will turn the chair over to you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And I think this is the time for a 5-minute recess, if Council would like to agree with that. Councillor Klipsy, Councillor Van der Walk, we're having a 5-minute recess. Thank you. I'll call the meeting back to order. And now, I've been trying earlier, but now is the time to turn it over to our facilitator, Alison Hepker. Ms.
Thank you,
Hepker,
Mr.
you
Mayor.
have the floor.
Thanks so much. So the next step in this process is to go through the Blue Sky initiatives that are related to capital. So as soon as we get to, oh, I've got the clicker. I've got control now. Perfect. There we go. Love it. There are 8 Blue Sky capital initiatives that we're going to address today. The improved soccer facilities path through to Clocks Square, Memorial Railway interim intersection improvements, PAMP truck at Crystalton Park, permanent bicycle racks along the waterfront, miscellaneous parking improvements, construct the elevated concrete walkway at Southam Park, and the cenotaph. Total value of these projects, just slightly over $1 million, funded by a variety of sources. So, Raj, did you want to speak to this at all at this point?
Thank you, Alison. I think I'll hold off until we get into the individual scoping sheets themselves.
Okay, great. So if we just can go to the first one of these, is the improved soccer facilities. Scoping sheet is on pages 42 to 43. And now I'll pass it off to Raj.
Thank you, Alison. So at a high level, this scoping sheet was pertaining to a request for storage of equipment that came for the soccer for the football association. And related to this request, there was a request made in last year's strategic planning process for improved soccer facilities. So there is a $620,000 provision included in the 2024 to 28 financial plan for improvement to soccer facilities. I believe it's in one of the outer years in 2028. So this request right here is specifically for a storage container for keeping equipment in at the facilities, and the scoping sheet proposes that $50,000. The request, yeah, that essentially we can do this within the operating budget itself. However, there is an alternative recommendation that has a $50,000 implication, or part of the alternative. Part of the recommendation has a $50,000 implication, and that's to basically do a needs assessment for our parks needs.
Lou? Just for some additional clarity, so the cost of the shipping container is anticipated to be Oceanside Football Club's expense. In the correspondence they provided to staff, they did say that they would be willing to consider expenses. So this is really to permit the installation of that shipping container at the community park, subject to council's final review of location. So that would come back. And the $50,000 is for the needs assessment, not for the container itself.
Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. I just had a question about how this $50,000 for the needs assessment is different from what's going to be contemplated in the 2026 Community Park Facilities Site Review. Is there some way that this could be included in that review?
Thank you. There is an overlap between these two initiatives. The Community Site Facilities Review looks at it in a more holistic vision to see what might fit where in the community park. This is specific to the needs of the Soccer Association. Also keep in mind there's other organizations that operate from the fields as well. But because it is a 2026 initiative, we would be looking at those next year during the strategic planning process. And similar to other discussions we've had, if there's an opportunity to bring those together and tighten up the budget by consolidating them, it certainly would happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Van der Valk's hand went up first. Go ahead.
Sure. Councillor Van der Valk?
Just for clarification, and under your staff comments on page 43, the capital project new facility to support community park users, that's not specific to the Oceanside football club, correct? Like, I'm just trying to understand the needs assessment is for everyone, not just the football club.
Thank you. That is correct.
If I could.
Mr. Mayor.
They need a container. I've gone there in the morning when they get ready for their soccer event, and there's a lot of kids playing soccer on Saturday mornings and Wednesdays evening. And they got soccer balls and nets and stuff all over the parking lot. And they said it would be nice if you could store that someplace. So I think this container, I think is a great idea. Thank you.
Councillor Skipsey?
I just wanted to mention too, in the past, when they've approached us, they have mentioned that they have a significant amount of funds that they would be willing to put towards something. So it may be that if we're willing to work in partnership with them, that whole $620,000 may not be required.
Thank you. Do we have a motion coming forward? Councillor Skipsey? Second? Mr. Mayor? Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. We can move to the next one, which is the path through Clock Square to link downtown to the East Village Uptown. Raj.
Thank you, Allison. So this request was advanced by Councillor Young, and it was for a path through Clock Square Tower. And staff are recommending that this initiative, the scoping sheet for this is included on pages 45 to 46 of the agenda. And staff are recommending that the initiative not be advanced to the capital program. There is a project request that will be coming forward for review during the 2025 to 29 financial plan called East Village Phase 3, which does envision a path through Clock Square in it as well. And the the contribution from the strategic initiatives reserved, which is showing down at the bottom, is associated with an alternative recommendation, which, sorry, I'm just going to look at the alternative recommendation and that is, if council chooses the alternative recommendation, I believe it's for landscape design, engineering and landscape design for a path through Clock Square, and that would inform us as to what it would cost to include a standalone project in the budget.
Just for ease of reference, on the actual agenda, both recommendations are laid out there for you. That's for me, that was the easiest way to follow along, and for the public too. So the staff recommendations and the alternative is on page 3 in the middle of the agenda. And yeah, just for reference, pages 45 to 46 are the scoping sheets. So questions, Councillor Young?
I'd like to move the alternative option, but to the year, fiscal year 2026, but also if there is grant funding available earlier, that we proceed with it earlier.
Okay, is there a seconder? Mr. Mayor, any questions or discussion? Councillor Van de Valk?
Yeah, I think the staff recommendation makes good sense in terms of there may well be, there is a plan for a path through the square anyways, and it seems more prudent to me to wait to see what's happening with the development in East Village and before we proceed with any changes to that pathway. So I think I would not be in favor of the alternative.
Thank you. Other input? Councillor Skipsey?
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Van der Valk. If there's already a plan going forward that could address, I think actually it's a lovely square already, and there was talk about just lifting some of the trees gradually, pruning them over time, and yeah, I think that it's kind of a nice to have in my books, and that it's not required at this point.
Thank you. Councillor Young?
The reason why I like to push it forward to any time that we can, especially if we can get grants available, is because there's already businesses already that have been functioning in East Village, and it's just been nice to have that connective downtown that of Qualicum Beach that people enjoy. Like they know they can just walk through, and it's an inviting walk through.
Thank you. Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Chair. The alternative recommendation is to undertake landscape design and engineering for any works that are through that area. It's very difficult to apply for grants without that level of detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or discussion? Call the question. In favor? Opposed? Motion's defeated. Do we have another motion coming forward? Councillor Van der Valk, Councillor Skipsey?
I would put forward the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Skipsey, discussion on the motion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thanks so much. And the next item is Memorial Avenue intersection.
Thank you, Allison. The Memorial Avenue and Railway Street interim intersection improvements are, the scoping sheet for these is included on page 47 to 48 of the agenda for those who are following along with their agenda packages. And this initiative was advanced by Mayor Westbrook. And the staff recommendation is to proceed with the improvements as described in the scoping sheet, and for them to be included as priorities in the community transportation plan implementation budget provision, which is included in the budget on an annual basis in fiscal 2026. I'm just going to go back for clarification. The 2025 improvements can be done within the existing operating budget.
Thanks, Mr. Hare. Mr. Marriage, any comments you want to make?
No, I think that pretty well says it. I think we all know what a tricky intersection that is, especially when we have an event happening at the market or with the Legion. I think this is a good way to start. It can happen without spending a lot of money. So I move the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Skipsey. Any discussion? Call the question. Oh, sorry, Councillor Skipsey.
I just had a question about whether the plan would be to have flashing lights at each of the 3 crosswalks, or like the first one as you're coming up the hill, or if it's just the one at Harlech and Memorial.
Mr. Sales?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Skipsey. The plan, which is on the agenda following the scoping sheet, identifies an advance warning sign for the pedestrian crossing further on railway. So the only flashing one, yes, you are correct, would be at the Harlech and Memorial intersection.
To start with.
Any further questions or discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next item is the pump track at Christendom Park, scoping sheet on page 50-51. Mr. Hare?
My understanding is, and I'll get the CAO to confirm, but we addressed this in the operating budget as item number 4. So I believe the staff's recommendation would be to close this scoping sheet off.
Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Chair. So I did want to confirm that originally our staff's understanding was this was put forward by the Qualicum Woods Residents Association. That was incorrect. It was actually put forward by the residents of the Qualicum Woods neighborhood, so we apologize for any confusion. The key point with this is it changes the scope because the town would need a society to partner with to manage insurance, a formal agreement, and a maintenance schedule going forward. forward. So we have spoken with the proponent that put this item forward. They're in clear understanding for the rationale for needing a society, and so we're asking that council allows us to operationalize this item, close off the scoping sheet by resolution, and that we can work with the proponent once a society is created. So again, staff would like to apologize for any confusion that resulted from the residents of Qualicum Woods neighborhood versus the Qualicum Woods Residents Association.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Skipsey moves the staff recommendation. Seconder, Councillor Vanderwacht. Discussion on the motion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Perfect. The next item is the installation of permanent bicycle racks along the waterfront. Councillor Skipsey, page 5253 for the scoping sheets.
Yes, this
Nope.
came.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
This came out of the Beach Day Committee. It was a recommendation from them. For Beach Day, they borrowed a bunch of bicycle racks, and they felt it would be much easier and beneficial to have permanent bike racks at the beach. Also taking into consideration that bikes look very different. They can be e-bikes, they can be tricycles, whatever, so it would have to be something that would accommodate the whole variety of bicycles. And I would move the staff recommendation. My only thing is I just wanted to know if there's the order that it would happen. I just don't want them to be at cross purposes, because I think we have Chief Rocalma looking at locations, and then the Parks and Rec Committee looking at locations. So I just wondered if there's any comment about in what order that would take place. Or
Okay, we'll come back to you for a motion. Mr. Hare, anything you want to add? Or Ms. Varela?
Thank you. If I may suggest, Mayor Westbrook has a comment here.
Okay. Mr. Mayor?
Yes, and that's a very good point. Both organizations need to take a look at this, but because we're dealing with the foreshore, which is a very sensitive area to our First Nations, Mr. Watson and I had a discussion with Chief Rocalma about the issues regarding the St. Andrew Lodge, which were all signed off and well prepared, Mr. Watson. I would commend you for that. We also mentioned that we would like to take a look at the different spots for bike racks. And I think, respectfully, I think he should have the first look at that and pick the areas that he thinks would be appropriate, and then take those back to the committee.
Okay. Any other staff comments? No? Okay. Councillor Skipsey?
yeah, I just had a question about the 15,000 and whether there's any grants that might be available for this type of project.
Mr. Sales?
Yes, thank you. Certainly, we always have our eyes out for grants, but I'm not aware of any at this time.
Thank you. Back to you, Councillor Skipsey, for a motion.
I would move the staff recommendation, please.
Seconder, Councillor Vanderwacht. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next item is the miscellaneous parking improvements. Mr. Hare, Mr. Sales?
Thank you. If I could present this one. So there's a lot of discussion that frequently comes up with regard to parking in the uptown area. And it has been identified in the past that a parking strategy is an important step to identifying long-term solutions for parking. But that is several years off before the town will be advancing with a parking strategy. Parking strategy might lessen the demand on the commercial area by, say, displacing people to the Civic Center or Harlech Road where there is additional parking. So the question has come up, though, what could the town do as in an interim measure to help alleviate some of the parking demand, especially in those areas where parking reaches essentially maximum capacity at certain points during the day? So that's the Fern and Memorial area. So the question was put forward and the scoping sheet was prepared to help answer that question. Are there interim parking improvements that could be made And if so, what would the scope of those improvements look like? So the scoping sheet before you proposes 2 steps of what this might look like. The first, in 2025, addresses potential improvements on Primrose Street. So that would mean opening up parallel parking on the west side of that road. It was previously labeled no parking because the school was operating there, and there was likely or presumably some conflicts with school drop-offs. The school is no longer operating, so council could open that up for parallel parking, which would increase the number of stalls in the area where it's most needed. The second improvement to consider in 2025 would be a design and analysis for how the town could make better utilization of Harlech Road, which is the portion west of the former fire hall. There's a lot of room there. Perhaps it could be angled parking. Perhaps the parallel parking could be improved. So a design and analysis would be appropriate to advance that project. There are 2 more significant investments to be considered, and that would be not in 2025, but for a future year. There's an opportunity to actually increase the amount of parking at the Civic Center in 2 possible locations. So the 2 possible locations are, one of them is north of the Ravensong parking lot down below, and the other is sort of just west of Jones Street, and there are maps in the package before you. So that would be 2027. The recommendation from council is that the 2 recommended for 2025 include the Primrose parking expansion, and that would be funded from deferred revenue for off-street parking, so no direct budgetary impact with that regard. And the second, the Harlech Road parking design would also be funded from that same funding source. And then the third one would be, if staff does it, or if council does advance it, it would be grant dependent, and that would be funded in 2027. The town portion would be from the deferred revenue for off-street parking as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Sales. Mr. Mayor, your comments?
Thank you. The area that you mentioned on Harlech, before the barricade, we have angle parking, provides lots of parking. I don't think there's any problem with traffic circulation there. The other side, west of the barricade, I think we walked it and we looked at it. I think we could probably accommodate more parking spots there than we lost on 2nd Avenue when we sold the parking lot. So I think for me, that's the easiest one. The one on Primrose also makes sense. So, and the third one, because we're looking for a grant, I would move the 3 items on this staff recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Councillor Young.
Councillor Young. Thank you. Thank you. Questions, discussion? Councillor Skipsey, and then Councillor Vanderbock.
Okay, well, I personally would like to see it broken down into the 3 because there's some that I'm in favor of and some that I'm not so keen on. I think that the $8,000 for the Harlech Road parking design would be money well spent, especially if it can create 30 additional parking spaces at a relatively low cost. That totally makes sense to me. I'm not sure about the Primrose parking expansion. I don't recall that proposal in the past. To me, it would make more sense to put parking along the side of Fern because that's where there's more businesses and people are already seem to be parking along there. I don't know, it just, to me, Primrose is sort of more of a residential feel to me than it would be along Fern. And then I wanted to clarify, it's the director of planning had suggested or said that the funding from deferred revenue for off-street parking. So is that essentially the parking in lieu funds?
Mr. Sales?
Through the chair to Councillor Skipsey, yes, that's correct. So when a development is short on parking, they make a contribution and it goes into this reserve. Sorry, not reserve, this funding source. Thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to point out, because this had come up previously about addressing the amount that we're currently charging for parking in lieu. So the stalls that we're looking at are over $30,000 per stall at the Civic Center, and that's on our own land. And what we're charging is certainly a lot less than that. I don't know if it's 5,000 or I can't remember the amount, but there's a big gap there. And so the sooner that we can address, I think, that gap between what we're charging for parking in lieu and what it actually costs us for parking in lieu, I think that would be a good thing to do for our taxpayers. So, I mean, I could vote in favor of the last part, the 650, knowing that it's not until 2027 and there may be other opportunities or other ideas, but I'm not really in favor of the Primrose parking at this time. Definitely on the Harlech, and questionable about the 650.
Any comments from staff at this point? Mr. Sills?
Thank you. Well, it's council's discussion in terms of the next steps. The one clarification I would add is that the difference between Primrose and, say, Fern Road, where parking is definitely needed perhaps the most, is that parking is not prohibited on Fern Road. So the major change on Primrose would be that the no parking signs would be taken down, and in those areas where there's not enough shoulder to park on, there would be gravel extended through that whole stretch. So that's the difference there. Fern Road definitely is the most needed parking area, but parking is already permitted. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van der Valk.
Yeah, thank you. It is mentioned in the staff comments, it is reasonable, while the school use no longer exists, it is reasonable to anticipate that residents will have become accustomed to no parking in the town's right-of-way located immediately adjacent to private property. So I'm just wondering if there's any consideration of those residents in putting forward the Primrose parking expansion. That would be my first question.
Mr. Sills?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Van der Valk. So any areas where driveway access was needed, or pedestrian access for walkways to their homes would still be maintained. But it is absolutely true that they have enjoyed perhaps no parking for a very long period of time, where other residents in the town do have parking available in front of their homes. So it's just identified in the staff memo because I think some concern may be anticipated with this potential change, even though it's no longer necessarily warranted because the school is no longer there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. To make it easier, I could amend my motion that we proceed with the Harlech improvement for parking and deal with them separately. So do a seriatim, and the first one would be to approve the Harlech proposal for additional parking.
So can we do that just informally? We'll sever the motion into three parts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll deal with Harlech first.
Yeah.
Right? And Councillor Young, I think you were the seconder. You're comfortable with that? Okay, so just dealing with Harlech for the moment. Any discussion on that component of the motion? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried?
And then the other one, now that we hear about Fern, which I agree is a problem for parking, and taking the signs away is one thing, but I think we also have to widen the shoulder to make it safe parking. So if we can come back to that at some other time and show us how many parking spots we would create and what it would cost to widen the shoulder, I think that would be a reasonable approach. And then the last item, which was the $650,000, depending on a grant, I think we can pass that because that's have some conditions attached and timing. So I move the third element of this recommendation as well.
So moving the third part of the recommendation, Councillor Young, do you want to second that? Does somebody else want to second it? Councillor Skipsey? And discussion on the third part, just so that we're clear, this is the allocation of $650,000 dependent on 2/3 grant funding, 1/3 funded from deferred revenue for off-street parking be allocated for expansion to the Civic Center parking. Is that Sorry, Ms. Varela.
Just bringing your attention, Chair, to the director at the back of the room. I know it's hard to see over your shoulder, but I think the director has a comment to add.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Thank you. There's a lot of information in these scoping sheets, so I just wanted to point out that the cost of the Primrose expansion is $45,000, and it's estimated to increase the number of stalls by 12.
Okay, well, we'll come back to Primrose in a minute.
Yeah, that one is off the list for now.
Yeah.
But the point that Councillor Skipsey made about what we charge for parking in lieu of not having their own place, I think it's more like 10,000 instead of 5, but we need to do a calculation of what is appropriate. Ms. Varela?
So Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Chair. So the parking in lieu bylaw is anticipated in our financial plan for 2028.
So then I would like to amend the motion. Sorry?
Okay.
Because if that's what's happening, we need to know that information. And I think that, to me, is a priority. Whenever it comes to funding, and we saw the buckets earlier, if they're leaking, we need to fix the leaking buckets. If we don't collect the parking requirements in lieu of parking, then we need to fix that. So I think we'll leave the rest alone for now.
So we have a motion on the table for this third component.
No, I think we need to do some other homework about the cost of in lieu in parking.
Okay. So do you, again, by agreement, can we remove that motion? And do you want to make another motion then about?
We'll just leave it for now and deal with the DCC of the parking in lieu of parking cost.
Okay, Ms. Varela.
Yeah, so just for clarity, is there a motion on the floor to advance the Harlech Road parking design?
That has been moved, seconded,
That's done.
and carried.
Thank you. Just from my situational awareness,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on. And that what I would suggest then, because we currently have 2028 with the parking in lieu bylaw, over the lunch break, I'd like the opportunity to confer with staff, because we have to consider this in terms of work planning. So if we could come back after the lunch break to provide comment on that second piece, that would be great.
Okay. Is that suit council?
Yeah. And Chair, I'd also like to ask staff for perhaps a conceptual plan of what it would look like to add parking on Fern Road, which was mentioned earlier, to remove the parking, no parking signs, and widen the shoulder so we can have safe parking there. Because I agree, that's where there's a lot of pressure for more parking.
Can we bring that back after we hear from staff after the lunch break? Would that be okay?
Just for clarity for the record, for people that are listening, could you formally withdraw your motion just because it is technically on the floor? Thank you.
Okay. And Councillor Young, you're comfortable with that as well? Okay, good. Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. I've just had my hand up for a while.
Sorry.
That's okay.
It's hard facing two directions. You know?
Yes, I know. I was just wondering if there has been any consideration made, because in the review of the bus garage site, it was found that a lot of the parking that's happening is staff parking. And so I'm wondering if there's a way to look at, is there other places where staff could comfortably park so that the public parking is more available to the public? So that I would just like to have that considered in all of these parking discussions. And I did have a strategic initiative about looking at permitted parking, which I think could help solve that, so that if there is staff parking required, then that could be looked at then.
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the municipal context, that is not town staff that is being referred to when we speak to staff. It is business employees.
Yes, sorry. Yes, staff for businesses and services that are in the town. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So we'll come back to this item after the lunch break? Yeah, okay. Anything else at the moment on this one? No, okay, we'll come back to it. So if we could move to the next one, is construct an elevated concrete walkway at Southland Park. Again, scoping sheets on page 60, 61. Councillor Young, do you want to make some comments, and then we'll go to the staff?
Again, this is an initiative that I like to see that it's grant dependent and also with consultation with Chief Michael Ricama first.
Thank you. To the staff then, to Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So this is a major initiative, and if the town were to advance with this, even in preparation of grant applications, it would require a significant amount of design work and also our archaeological assessment and consultation with Chief Ricama. So the staff recommendation is not to advance this into the strategic plan. However, if council does want to fully explore this as an alternative and prepare for grants, there is an alternative recommendation available. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. As Mr. Watson and I met with Chief Ricama on site to talk about the issues that need to be addressed for the cottage, we mentioned this. And he said, no, we need to leave this natural. So Mr. Watson says, thumbs down. He says, 2 thumbs down. So there's no point pursuing it. He doesn't want that.
Other questions, discussion? Any motions coming forward?
I could make a motion that we discontinue the consideration for an elevated walkway in Satellin Park.
So that would be the staff recommendation?
Yeah.
Is there a second? Councillor Skipsey? Any discussions? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And then on to the next Cenotaph Memorial Avenue at Railway Street. Again, scoping pages on 62, 63. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I want to thank staff for their report and looking at potential locations for the cenotaph. It used to be at the waterfront, right where the crosswalk was before we did the whole roundabout project. And it was always a kind of a tricky location because there wasn't a lot of room between the walkway and the street for these veterans to gather on these days. Having this location makes far more sense. They can walk from the Legion to that place. We talked earlier about having a crosswalk nearby so they could be crossing safely. So I move that we proceed with this particular project and the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Skipsey? Any comments from the staff? Any questions? Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. I'm wondering if the changes that are proposed to the intersection at Memorial and Railway, would they not affect the design and construction of a cenotaph? And also, I believe we are, sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Sales?
Thank you. So the actual design of the cenotaph is not necessarily what you see in your scoping sheet before you. That proposal was put forward by a member of the Legion several years ago, and the cost of that detailed design likely exceeds the amount that staff is recommending to allocate towards the project. So you'll see the recommendation is for what we refer to as a design build process, where the level of effort and cost of construction is scaled to the funding that's available. So the town would take that $40,000 and approach potential contractors in the area. We would identify them and then finalize the design and process to ensure it doesn't exceed that $40,000. So to directly answer your question, in that discussion with the contractor, we would ensure that it doesn't conflict at all with the plans for a crosswalk in that area. And if I could offer one clarification on something that was asked earlier regarding the flashing lights at that location, my response was, I think, incomplete. So the plan for next year is that there would be an advanced pedestrian warning sign, but in the future year, we are hoping to actually have the flashing RFBs. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. Go back to the cenotaph. Oh, sorry, Mr. Hare.
One of the other things I just wanted to mention was that in the slide before, we identified the Community Building Fund as the funding source, and we will attempt to fund it through that, but if that source doesn't qualify, we will fund it from the Asset Investment Reserve, which does have enough funding to address this initiative.
This is the $40,000. Is that correct? Yep. Okay. Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. I just wondered if, I guess because it was the town's changes to the waterfront that is resulting in the need to relocate the cenotaph. But I wondered if there was any appetite from the Legion to partner with us on this project.
Mr. Sales?
Thank you. So the Legion's aspirations for the cenotaph have changed somewhat over the last few years. So when the proposal was put forward that's in your package, there was an intention to do fundraising and construct a much more complex facility there. So since then, they've simplified their designs. And so essentially, the elements that used to be on the waterfront, that's all they're looking for, and maybe a few benches. So you'd see the cenotaph itself and a flagpole and maybe some seating with a sitting area. So it wouldn't have the level of landscaping, for example, you see in the plan. Thank you.
Any other discussion? We have a motion on the table, right? Yeah. Can I call the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. So I think it's probably appropriate then for us to take our break to provide time for the staff to caucus. Oh, sorry. Mr. Mayor, I knew there was something going on there.
Yeah. Because we're a little bit ahead of schedule, rather than having a lunch break and then come back for public input, I would open the floor for public input at this time.
Yep, good. And I'll pass this back to you then.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hepkerk. And anyone from the gallery would like to speak to these issues we just talked about today? See, go ahead, Susan. No, you're first.
I have something very simple, I hope. And it goes back to the health, or the asset health scores. And it shows that our current score is 88%. And I remember back on that November 1st presentation, I think that was described as a very healthy, a very good score. So when we're proposing the three alternatives, and we're looking at 93% going down to 30%, then my question is, well, how do you put that into context? And what is a reasonable score for an institution like this to have? So I look at 30% and I say, well, that's obviously too low. But I don't know, and I would hope that staff could provide some sort of information on what would be a prudent score for us to achieve. And that's all I had.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Monahan.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Kevin Monahan. I'm just looking at the financial plan and the asset costs and looking at the increasing amounts of funding required. And I look at these figures and I see that they are in 2024 dollars. So the inflation is not recognized in this. But the thing is that over the next X number of years, the town would then be looking for increased taxes and contributions from the citizens. And yet, because we're talking 2024 dollars, most citizens' income is not increasing. And so every time you increase the taxes or requirement from citizens, you're actually taking a larger chunk of their income. And I think that means that you have to take a really, really strong look at every dollar you spend and say, do we need to do that or not? And I've appreciated that that effort has taken place here today to look at things very closely. But I think we need to keep in mind that every increased dollar is a certain amount taken out of, an increased amount taken out of a lot of pensioners' incomes. So I'm very concerned about that. And I will let other people make comments. I have one other comment, but I'll go ahead now. Okay. Well, the issue goes back to the tree bylaw and policies. I don't think you wouldn't expect me to let that go by without comment. But basically what I'm looking at is I really appreciate Council moving forward the effort to review the bylaw. I do believe that there are some policy decisions and possibly a couple of bylaw decisions that could be made without any real level of cost, and I would hope that the recommendation that you've made would include the understanding that there are some things that could be done virtually immediately to advance some of these issues, and also that as a tree policy, as a policy comes along from staff for looking at appeals under the bylaw, et cetera, I would hope that for that policy there would be consultations conducted. And so that is my basic recommendation relating to the tree bylaw. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Tim?
Still on here. Tim Pritchard, Welcome Beach. First, I say there's certainly been a lot to digest in this package this morning and in the first session held on October 21st. I'd start by saying I thought that the presentation relating to infrastructure by Oliver Watson and his partner was excellent. There's a lot of content in there, and I agree completely with the mayor. It's trying to understand what's in these buckets. It's going to be a big challenge for staff and for council to deal with. There's several things that are, when it gets to that, it's how grant dependent everything is. If you put a list of all the projects, and you've got staff hours, you've got a dollar estimate, and a tag on the dollar estimate is whether it's grant dependent. That gets concerning, that you're depending on someone else. You're not, in a way, not self-sufficient, even though grants are nothing but over taxation coming back to us as rebates. So, you know, it's, that is concerning. Also, interesting when you use the term of blue sky projects. I personally find that's a bit like a wish list. You know, it's possible, but maybe not probable. I think whatever you want to call it, it's very important, and it shouldn't be out there as a maybe. It would be like to firm up these things, and it isn't apparent when you use the term blue sky. The other thing is the proposal to start to make some improvements on Memorial near the railway tracks. It's the flashing light is a good addition, but one of the things that should be considered is, and it was recommended in earlier comments, is that there's a need for something further north on coming up the hill on the curve, because that's really where the speed is happening. People are driving very fast there, and when you get the new affordable housing traffic coming into Memorial at Village Way West, you've got 5 or 6 roadways coming in about a 200-meter stretch. There really needs to be a very comprehensive proposal to deal with that, because it's dangerous, and other people have talked about it previously. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Anyone else from the gallery? Pat, come on up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Pat Jacobson, West Crescent Road. It would be remiss of me not to get up and say I thought it was very positive that we're going to do a thorough review of the tree protection bylaw in 2025. And in addition, we're looking forward to our tree canopy update, which is being done this year. And I think that will help us inform what our near and long-term strategies need to be regarding the health and enhancement of our urban forest. And just one other little footnote. On the issue of arts and culture, you might consider the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere region as part of that. Arts and culture is embedded in their United Nations Strategic Development Goals, and I think they'd be a good partner in that whole initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Then without further ado, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Oh, I thought I was done, sorry. Almost, okay. Ms. Varela.
Your Worship, so we are a little off the agenda. My apologies for any confusion. We are faster than we anticipated. So we do have a lunch break scheduled for 30 minutes. Staff would like to confer and bring a couple items back. And then if there are any additional discussion points, there is opportunity after lunch as well.
Mm. Yeah, so we've had public input. Usually after public input, that's the end of the meeting. Are we expecting the gallery to stay to see what other things come up? So they'd like to make comments on that. This is a bit awkward. I think we should have those discussions, report back to the next council meeting, and leave it at that.
Certainly, Your Worship. Thank you for that direction.
Okay, so a motion to adjourn would be appropriate. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Young, discussion, all in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.